Alright everyone, I have spectacular news. I am very happy to report that George W. Bush has apparently refused to endorse Donald Trump. Good. Because if he endorsed Donald Trump, I would be questioning why, and I would think less of Trump maybe for it. This actually makes me really glad. Let me explain for the younger voters, because if you're like an under, let's say, 22, maybe 23 voter, you were quite little when W was around, and chances are, like, you don't really have a real recollection. Like, I was in middle school when 9/11 happened. We're talking early Bush admin. You were in, like, I don't know, first grade or something like that. You probably, younger millennials even, you don't probably have quite as much of a memory of the Bush era. You sort of came about in the Obama and Trump eras for you younger voters. Let me goddamn explain why George W.'s endorsement should not matter to anybody. And also why this is goddamn meaningless. I mean, it's not going to hurt Trump. If anything, it gets him a few votes. George W. Bush is the biggest asshole in modern political history and the worst president since, well, I don't know how far back. You could make an argument that his father was about as bad as him, but his father at least didn't wreck the economy completely. His father failed to get a second term. W got a second term because his opponent was even more boring than Joe Biden, so keep that in mind. And John Kerry, look him up and look at his rap sheet of corruption. It didn't really matter. It was a no-choice election. It was sort of like voting for second-term Obama or Mitt Romney, who's basically the Republican Obama. Didn't really make a fucking difference now, did it? Sometimes voting matters. In some elections, I hate to say it, but it doesn't. Anyway, George W. Bush was the man who, after 9/11, foisted the Patriot Act on people, which elements of the surveillance apparatus were already being designed by Clinton, in all honesty, but he massively expanded upon them. And using people's fear, he rapidly expanded executive power, the opaque nature of intel agencies and bureaus, and all of these other things. He failed completely on Katrina, and tens of thousands of U.S. citizens were internally displaced for a long period of time. Then, and why? Because he carpetbagged the head of FEMA. It was one of his personal business buddies. He had no qualifications to be heading disaster relief. It took him 2 fucking days to do anything. Then the first thing they did was disarm a bunch of people in direct contravention of the Second Amendment. George W. didn't stand for anything conservative. His idea of conservatism was a minor tax cut to large corporations, which was heavily tilted towards multinationals, and then going off and wasting trillions of dollars killing civilians. A complete abysmal failure, a 0 out of 10 presidency. Even many Republicans towards the end understood this. You cannot make a reasoned argument with a straight face that George W. was superior to Donald Trump. I hate to tell you, but there is no, if you're a conservative, Trump actually gave tax relief to small businesses and entrepreneurs especially. So that's one for him against W, who gave people a small stimulus and then threw the rest of the tax relief to literal top, unlike what Trump did. All of the things that the Democrats falsely claim about Trump's actual tax reform are better fitted to W's fake tax reform. He pissed away our diplomatic relations with key allies. And again, advantage Trump. Supposedly Trump is so bad for our diplomacy. There aren't really that many problems with a lot of world leaders. Okay, Trudeau complains once in a while. He was still willing to sign off on the USMCA. Now, I thought he hated Trump. And Trump was evil and Trudeau was the face of liberalism or some bullshit. What about Macron? They're still able to have a conversation. You remember, I love it when people hold up Angela Merkel as the standard of world politics because they're just so brain dead. I love it when they do that and they don't realize she's actually a zealot as well. Do you remember that time? Oh, no, you don't, so I'm asking this rhetorically. You remember that time that Bush made a fiasco out of a, what was it, the G-something meeting there? I can't remember. And he came up behind Angela Merkel and, like, squished her shoulders, and she obviously was like, what the fuck are you doing? And he thought this was funny. He was probably drunk when he did it, because, of course, he's a supposedly recovered alcoholic, but, you know, that's debatable. I can remember seeing a clip of him being a little bit shiny-faced pouring a beer, and the foam going everywhere, and he claimed it was a non-alcoholic beer. I'm finding that real hard to believe, given the shit-eating grin on his face at the time that video clip was made. George W. was the architect of so many problems in the United States. The beginning of our massive debt load, pissing away our economic growth, again through his particularly wasteful style of economic situations that caused the Great Recession. That wasn't Obama didn't cause it. He prolonged it with shovel-ready and some of his other stupid shit, but it was the Bush era that led to it. Bush tearing apart some of the laissez-faire programs of the past and then instituting as well both regulation and deregulation, but doing it all topsy-turvy, throwing everything to the literal top, expecting it to literally trickle down. He did what the Democrats claim Reagan wanted to do. All Reagan wanted to do was balance tax cuts. Bush actually did aim them all at multinational corporations, sending a bunch of our cash overseas. The fact that George W. Bush, the worst president of at least modern times, again, I'm scratching my head. Now, I mean, you have to go back to like the 30s. You have to go back to like the Hoover era in order to find a president worse than Bush. I know a lot of Republicans will wax nostalgic too. They say, well, Obama's worse than Bush. No, Obama was not worse than Bush. Obama was maybe a half a point better in my book than George W. Yes, conservatives out there, partisan Republicans, MAGA hat wearers. Yeah, there's someone worse than Obama in recent history. It's just that recency bias made you forget that. Just like all the Democrats right now that are pretending to praise George W. as though he has some principles, you were calling him Satan incarnate 10 years ago. And you were kind of right. George W. was a miserable fucking failure. I'm not saying Obama wasn't basically the same thing, but at least he stood out of the way of the oil boom. If Bush had been in office, he probably would have embezzled the profits and fucked the economy harder. A total jerk-off. And also his Bushisms were a con. His biggest con was convincing people that he was dumb and not evil. A lot of times people were like, well, you know, he says and does stupid shit, and they saw him as sort of a court jester. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, he was stabbing people in the back. Dick Cheney was in part running things for Halliburton and all these gross firms, these Mercs and so forth, Blackwater, which changed its name, I think, recently several times in order to shake off the bad brand they had from that particular era. And he pissed away. I mean, the war effort was all fucked up. Diplomacy was all fucked up. The economy got all fucked up. Name a thing that George W. did well other than diplomacy in parts of West Africa. That's literally... Bush's crowning achievement is the fact that he was the first president to make a concerted effort to win over more economic alliances in parts of developing Africa. That's basically the only contribution he made to our fucking country. In everything else, he was a miserable failure, and he's still doing that shtick. Like when he starts painting dog pictures and stuff, what is that? That's an effort to take care of a tarnished image of him as a brutal, bloodthirsty fucking warmonger, which is correctly how to see him. Oh, but he makes a cute little grin and paints them dog pictures. I mean, come on, it was a goddamn joke. Bush is a joke. His fans are jokes. If you're self-proclaimed liberal or certainly a leftist saying, oh, well, Bush has principles. He refuses to back Adolf Hitler, a.k.a. Orange Man. Just take a red S and carve it into your chest to stand for sellout, because that's what you are. You can't possibly convince me that these people deep inside don't know that this is bullshit. I think deep inside they know it, and they want Trump gone so badly that they're willing to pretend that George W. Bush had redeeming qualities. Again, I can't think of one. There's a famous clip of him back when he's governor, absolutely sauced out of his mind, calling people beautiful and weird shit like that. The dude's lost it. He blew a gasket, he drank too much alcohol, he became verbally dumb and well, still maintaining his cutthroat status, and then he managed to con all of the United States for 8 years into keeping him in power despite not deserving the position of dog catcher in D.C. Again, miserable failure. I'm very glad that Bush won't endorse. That takes it from a 99% to a 100% chance of me pulling the lever for Trump, actually, to tell the truth. Fuck Bush. That's about all. Peace out.